Helena lived quietly in a small house at the edge of town. Her days were simple: tea at dawn, slow walks through her garden, a little reading by the window. To anyone passing by, her life looked peaceful. But when night came, peace left her side. As the sun faded, fear returned. It crept into her thoughts like the cold, gentle at first, then deep, filling every corner. She feared not the pain of dying, but the loneliness of it. The thought of leaving this world unseen, unheard, unnoticed, made her heart tremble. She would lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, listening to the tick of the clock, the sound of time slipping away. "Will anyone know?" she whispered once into the darkness. "Will anyone come?" But no one answered, only the wind against her window and the creak of the house settling. She prayed each night for courage, but the fear clung to her like a shadow. It followed her into her dreams, into her mornings, into the quiet corners of her soul. And yet, beyond her fear, heaven watched in perfect patience, waiting for the moment when love would whisper louder than death. Helena's home was filled with ghosts, not of fright, but of tenderness. The scent of old lavender clung to the air, and framed photographs lined the walls. Her husband's face smiled from one of them, kind eyes, a steady presence she still spoke to sometimes when the nights grew long. She would walk slowly from room to room, touching the backs of chairs, smoothing the edges of curtains, whispering small fragments of her past aloud. "You always liked this chair best," she'd murmur to the empty living room. "You said it caught the morning light." Each object carried a story. Each corner held a trace of laughter or prayer. Yet the more she remembered, the heavier her heart grew. "So much life," she sighed, "and now, only me." She didn't resent the years, but she couldn't shake the thought that life had quietly passed her by, leaving her to wait. For what? She wasn't sure. And in that waiting, her greatest fear returned, curling softly around her heart, to die in silence, with no one there to see her go. Evenings came too soon for Helena. By the time the last light left the sky, her house felt vast and empty. The ticking clock grew louder, the walls seemed to sigh, and her thoughts darkened with the room. She would light a single candle and sit beside it, unwilling to turn off all the lights. "It's only a shadow," she told herself whenever she caught her reflection moving in the glass. But the comfort was fleeting. Shadows have a way of reminding the heart of what it has lost. Sometimes she would hear the distant hum of cars or laughter from the street. Those sounds comforted her. They meant that life was still happening somewhere, even if not here. But when all grew silent, her fear returned. "Please," she whispered once, clutching her blanket, "don't let me die alone." It was not a request born of panic, but of longing. A small, fragile plea from a soul that still wanted to be seen, even at the end. And though she heard nothing in reply, her whisper did not vanish into emptiness. It reached the one who never leaves his children to face the night alone. There was one question that lived quietly in Helena's chest, a question she never dared to voice to anyone, not even to God. "Will anyone be here when I go?" It lingered in her thoughts during the long afternoons when the clock marked time too slowly and the silence grew thick. She didn't need grand company, just a hand to hold, a presence to remind her that she mattered until the very end. She had buried her husband 20 years earlier. Her children lived far away, their lives busy and full. Letters came less often, phone calls shorter. "We'll come soon," they always said, but soon stretched into years. One evening she sat by the window watching the sun fall. Her heart ached, not from anger, but from quiet resignation. "Maybe that's how it will be," she whispered, "me and the night." But heaven, listening in holy silence, marked her words with tenderness, for she didn't know that when all other hands fail, one remains, scarred, eternal, and already reaching for hers. Helena's prayers had changed with time. Once they had been strong and full of faith, spoken aloud each morning and night. But now her voice was faint, her strength too fragile for long prayers. So she prayed in silence. Sometimes with her eyes open, sometimes with her hands resting quietly on her lap. Her thoughts became her petitions, her sighs, her psalms. "Lord, she would think. If you are near, please let me feel you. No thunder came, no visions, no miracles, only stillness. And yet, something in her spirit told her that this stillness wasn't empty. It was full of someone listening. There were nights when words failed her completely, when all she could do was cry softly into her pillow, whispering his name between breaths. Jesus, Jesus. She didn't realize that even these faint whispers rose higher than the strongest hymn. For every quiet cry from a broken heart is music to heaven. And though she didn't see it, the Comforter was already kneeling beside her, gathering her tears, preparing to speak peace into her fear. One night, sleep took her gently, but her dreams were heavy. She found herself walking through a mist alone, barefoot, the air cool and grey. Ahead, she saw a long table set for a feast, but every chair was empty. The table stretched far into the distance, vanishing into light. She stopped and whispered, "Is anyone here?" Her voice echoed softly, then faded. The silence that followed pierced her heart. Tears filled her eyes as she sank to her knees. "So this is it," she murmured. "This is how I'll go, alone." But just as the words left her lips, the air around her began to change. The mist shimmered, the light deepened, and from behind her, a voice, calm, gentle, and familiar, said, "You will never be alone, Helena." She turned, but there was no one there, only warmth like sunlight on her skin. When she woke, her pillow was damp with tears, but her heart was strangely calm. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled her. Something, or someone, had stepped into her dreams. And soon, he would step into her waking life too. A week later, Helena's quiet routine was interrupted by a gentle knock at the door. When she opened it, a young nurse stood there, sent by the local clinic to check on her health. "Good morning, Mrs. Helena," the nurse said with a soft smile. "I just wanted to see how you've been managing." Helena hesitated for a moment before letting her in. The nurse moved through the small home, checking her pulse, her medications, her cupboards. Her presence was kind but fleeting, the sort of kindness that warms briefly and then drifts away. They talked a little, about the weather, about the garden, about how quiet the days had become. The nurse promised to return next week. After she left, Helena stood by the door for a long time, listening to the echo of footsteps fading down the street. "She means well," she murmured, "but she doesn't know the kind of ache medicine can't touch." She sat back in her chair and whispered, "It's not the body that hurts the most, Lord. It's the heart." Her words hung in the air, tender, honest, sacred, and the one who heard them began to prepare the comfort she had long waited for. That night, Helena lit a small white candle and placed it on the table beside her bed. It became her quiet ritual, her act of courage against the dark. She would watch the flame dance softly, the shadows shifting across the walls. "As long as there's light," she told herself, "I'm not completely alone." But deep down she knew the candle was more than habit. It was her symbol of faith, a small reminder that light always comes back, no matter how deep the night becomes. She prayed in silence, her hands folded loosely over her chest. "Lord, if my time is near," she whispered, "let me not be afraid. Just stay with me." The flame flickered, steadying again as if in response. She smiled faintly. "You see me, don't you?" Then, as she drifted toward sleep, she thought she saw something in the corner of the room. Not a figure, not a shadow, but a warmth that seemed to glow from nowhere. She closed her eyes. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe in the dark. The following night the air was still, no wind, no creaks from the walls, no distant sounds, only the faint hiss of her candle. Helena lay awake, eyes half closed, her heart calm, but alert. She didn't know why, but something about this silence felt different. It wasn't heavy, it was expectant. She turned slightly on her pillow and whispered, "Are you here?" And in that moment, something deep within her, beyond hearing, beyond thought, answered, "Yes." She froze, not from fear but awe. The word wasn't sound, it was presence. It filled the air, the bed, her very breath. "Do not be afraid. the voice continued, softer than the flicker of her candle. I am with you. Even in the dark, even in the end. Tears welled in her eyes. She pressed her hands to her chest. Oh, Lord, she whispered, you heard me. The room glowed faintly, not from her candle, but from something purer. And in that stillness, fear began to fade like mist before the morning. Jesus had spoken, and his voice was peace. The next evening, Helena sat quietly in her chair, hands resting over her heart. She didn't speak, didn't pray. She just waited, eyes closed, listening for that same voice. It came not in sound, but in knowing, that gentle certainty that fills every space fear used to live in. Helena, it whispered, I have always been with you. Her breath caught. She hadn't heard her name spoken like that in years, softly, lovingly, as if every syllable carried eternity within it. Tears slid down her cheeks. You really came, she whispered. You didn't forget me. The voice returned, steady, tender and sure. I never leave those who call my name. A peace so deep it almost hurt filled her chest. It wasn't fleeting or fragile. It felt eternal. The fear that had haunted her for years melted quietly, like frost under the first light of dawn. Even when I die, she whispered, her voice trembling, you'll be there. The answer came as a warmth around her, gentle as breath, steady as love itself. Especially then. The days that followed were quiet, but different. Helena began to feel something whenever she prayed, not emotion, but presence. It was as though invisible hands rested lightly over hers, holding them, steadying them. When pain woke her in the night, she didn't panic anymore. She would close her eyes and whisper, I know you're here, and the pain would soften, not vanish, but lose its edge. Sometimes she felt those unseen hands brush her shoulders, her forehead, the way a parent comforts a child. It didn't frighten her. It made her feel safe, known. She told no one. Who would believe it? But she didn't need to. What was happening between her and God was too holy for explanation. She began to notice that the loneliness she once feared was gone. She was still physically alone, yes, but her spirit was never empty. In those quiet moments, she realized the truth she had spent a lifetime missing. She had never been alone, not once. And as her body weakened, her soul grew strong. That night, Helena lay in bed with her candle glowing beside her. The flame moved gently, casting soft halos across the walls. She stared at it for a long time, smiling faintly. You've been faithful too, she said softly, every night, keeping me company. The house was still, utterly quiet, but she didn't feel the silence pressing against her anymore. Instead, it wrapped around her like a blanket, filled with peace. She whispered her last prayer of the day, the same one she had whispered for years. Stay with me, Lord. And he did. She felt his presence fill the room again, tender, steady, complete. It was as if the walls themselves breathed with his nearness. The fear that once gripped her heart was gone. In its place was an unshakable calm. Her eyes grew heavy, and as she drifted toward sleep, she smiled and murmured, I'm not afraid anymore. And somewhere in the stillness, the whisper came again, not to her ears, but to her heart. You were never meant to be. That night, peace held her until morning. The next morning, sunlight poured into Helena's room like a soft blessing. It touched her face gently, waking her with warmth instead of fear. For the first time in years, she didn't open her eyes with dread. She opened them with peace. The candle had burned low during the night, but a thin ribbon of smoke rose from the wick, carrying a faint fragrance of wax and stillness. She smiled, remembering the voice that had filled her heart before sleep. You were never meant to be afraid. She sat up slowly, her joints stiff, but her spirit alive. Every corner of the room seemed brighter. The air itself felt lighter, almost joyful. Good morning, Lord, she whispered. You're still here, aren't you? And though the room was quiet, she felt that same presence stir gently around her, like sunlight made of love. Helena began to hum as she made her tea, her voice soft but steady. It wasn't a hymn she'd planned, just a simple melody that felt placed in her heart. The woman who once woke trembling now greeted each day with a small, unexplainable joy, the kind that doesn't come from circumstance, but from heaven. Later that week, there was a knock at the door. Helena opened it to find her young neighbor, a woman named Clara, standing there with a worried smile. "I haven't seen you in a while," Clara said. "I just wanted to check on you. Are you doing all right?" Helena nodded, her eyes kind. "I am," she said softly. "Better than I've been in a long time." Clara stepped inside, glancing around. The house seemed different, brighter somehow, though nothing had changed. "It feels peaceful here," she said quietly. Helena smiled. "It's him," she said simply. "He's been keeping me company." Clara hesitated. "You mean Jesus?" Helena nodded, her gaze steady. "Yes, dear, he's very real. I used to be so afraid of dying alone, but now I'm not afraid of anything. When he's near, there's no such thing as alone." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. She reached for Helena's hand, squeezing it gently. "You make me want to believe again." Helena smiled, her thumb brushing Clara's fingers. "Then do. He's already closer than you think." And for a moment, the little house felt like holy ground. After that day, Helena began noticing little things, soft reminders that peace was not an illusion. A white feather on her windowsill, a bird that sang at her window every dawn, a breeze that always seemed to stir when she prayed. She didn't chase explanations anymore. She simply smiled and said, "I see you, Lord." Each day became a conversation between her soul and the unseen. The ordinary became sacred. Even her pain seemed to glow with quiet meaning. She no longer feared the ticking clock or the slow fading of her strength. She knew now that her life was not slipping away, but being gathered, every moment, every breath, into the hands of someone who loved her more deeply than she could understand. One afternoon, as she sat by her window watching the light shift through the trees, she whispered, "I think heaven is already here." And for a heartbeat she could swear she heard a soft reply, carried by the wind itself. "It is, Helena, it is." In the days that followed, Helena moved through her home with a sense of quiet purpose. She began to tidy small things, folding her favorite blanket, organizing her books, placing her old Bible on the table beside her bed. It wasn't resignation, it was readiness. She didn't tell anyone that she felt her time drawing near. There was no fear in her heart, only peace, deep and steady. "When you call," she whispered, "I'll be ready." One afternoon she wrote short notes for her children, one for each. The words were simple, full of calm gratitude. "Don't be sad when I go. Jesus has been with me every single day. He is with you too, if you only let him be." She sealed each envelope with a soft smile. Then she brewed tea and sat by the window, the sunlight touching her hands like a blessing. "Lord," she said quietly, "thank you for staying until I stopped being afraid." Her eyes closed for a moment as a familiar warmth filled the room, not fleeting but permanent, the kind of presence that says, "You will never face the end alone." That evening, the sky turned gold. The light entered her small home like a soft tide, filling every corner with peace. Helena watched it from her chair, her eyes reflecting the glow. Something within her stirred, not fear, not sorrow, but a gentle knowing. The same voice that had whispered to her in the night now spoke again, clear and kind. "It's time." She didn't answer with words. She simply smiled. Her breathing slowed, her gaze fixed on the fading horizon. The shadows lengthened, the air grew still. She placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "Thank you, Jesus, for keeping your promise." The world around her seemed to hold its breath. Then, as softly as a sigh, she leaned back, her face peaceful, her body still. Outside, the sun slipped below the trees, painting the sky in hues of rose and silver. It was not an ending. It was a passage. Heaven was opening. In that last quiet moment, time seemed to pause. The line between earth and eternity blurred into light. Helena felt no pain, no fear, only peace, vast and tender. The same warmth that had visited her so many nights now surrounded her completely. She opened her eyes one final time and saw him. Jesus stood before her, not distant, not shining with unreachable brilliance, but clothed in love, familiar and kind. His eyes met hers, and she knew. This was the one who had whispered to her heart, who had sat beside her bed, who had stayed through every lonely hour. He reached out his hand and said softly, "You're home." Tears filled her eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition. She took his hand, and the world around her faded into light. The candle beside her bed flickered once, then went out, not in darkness, but in completion. The woman who once feared dying alone had been carried gently across by the one who never lets go. And in that moment, peace was no longer something she felt. It was where she lived, forever. The next morning, the neighbor Clara came to check on Helena, as she often did. The door was unlocked, the air inside still and warm. The candle beside the bed had burned to its end, leaving a faint curl of smoke that smelled faintly of honey and peace. Clara called softly, "Helena?" But no answer came. She stepped closer and froze, then smiled through her tears. Helena sat just as she had the evening before, her head resting gently against the chair, her Bible open on her lap. Her face was peaceful, her lips curved in the softest smile, as if she had fallen asleep listening to a lullaby only heaven could sing. But the room was different. It glowed, not with sunlight, but with something unseen. A warmth filled the air, the kind that wraps around grief and makes it gentle. Clara pressed her hand to her chest. "You weren't alone," she whispered. "You never were." Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying a faint melody. Not quite song, not quite silence. The light lingered in that house for days afterward, as if love itself had decided to remain a while longer. Time passed, but the peace in Helena's home never left. Those who entered said it felt different, as though someone still lived there, someone unseen but very near. Clara kept the house just as Helena left it. Each evening she would light a small candle by the bed the way Helena had done. "For remembrance," she said, though in her heart she knew it wasn't memory she felt. It was presence. On quiet nights she swore she could feel it too, that warmth, that whisper, that stillness that seemed to breathe through the air. Sometimes she even caught herself speaking softly, "I know you're still here." And she was right, for the one who had promised to never leave Helena had never left at all. He had simply widened his presence, filling not just her final breath, but the space she had called home. The candle's flame flickered softly, and the peace that had carried Helena across eternity remained, steady, gentle, alive. Because love does not end at the last heartbeat. It lingers, it stays. And Jesus, the keeper of the lonely and the light of the dying, still walks that quiet house, where fear once lived and peace now reigns.